Lovely. Let's do it. Today's guest has dedicated his life to serving and helping people with their personal finances. Like many, he struggled with living paycheck to paycheck, debt, and the constant hamster wheel of never ending payments for much of his adult life. After losing his home to foreclosure and his first marriage ending in 2012, he went on a 5-year journey to become debt free. I said to become a debt free dad, which he has accomplished. He provides an eye opening outlook on debt and money that challenge today's popular thinking through speaking engagements, his own podcast, The Debt Free Dad, social media, and his online membership site, Roots of Personal Finance, which has helped people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars. Today, he is going to help us all learn a simple process to develop a healthier financial mindset and take control of our finances so we can live more and stress less. Amen to that. Welcome to the podcast, Brad Nelson.
Hey, thank you, ladies, so much. So excited to be here,
We are so excited to have you.
especially talking about this complicated thing called money. Hey,
Yes, we haven't figured
Yeah.
it out yet, so we're happy you're here.
hey,
Yeah.
I'm still working on it myself, so I don't like to call myself an expert. I'm practicing. I'm always practicing, but the more you practice, the better you get. So,
Yeah.
um, I think that's one thing a lot of people feel is like, oh, you must just get it right all the time. And it's like, no, and actually I don't. I struggle with some of this stuff still with all the stuff I've learned over the years, and it's just a very emotional topic for a lot of people. So I'm happy to be here and talk about it, a little bit about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's such a personal thing, and like we were just saying before we started recording, it can be such a point of resentment or contention in relationships, yet we don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about it with our friends or our family, and so that's why we're having this conversation right here, because we got to talk about the elephant in the room. So let's start with you. Can you share a little bit more about your own personal financial journey? What was the
Yeah.
tipping point? How'd you learn all this stuff?
Yeah. So, I think for me, I lived a pretty normal financial life that most people are, as far as people living paycheck to paycheck. I kind of fell into that mentality very, very early on. And I was always taught at a young age, especially being the youngest of three boys, that, you always have to have a good credit score. And that's really kind of one of the number one lessons that I would say my parents taught us, is that you have to have a good credit score. They would also share a little bit about make sure you save for, the future, and, don't spend more than you make and things like that. But what I always remember the most is just credit score, credit score, credit score, so you can get payments and buy a house and do all that stuff. So that's what I focused on. And I made all my payments on time. I had an excellent credit score. I had no problem getting debt, which was the problem. And I ended up, just falling into this more, consumerism lifestyle I think a lot of people live, and fell into credit card debt, and always kind of told myself that, when I get that next raise or when I get that next bonus, I'll pay it off when things get a little better. I'm not going to keep this up. But then we all know lifestyle creeps in, and
Mhm.
that never happened, never seemed to happen. And as I got into my later 20s, it was just like, I'm just not wanting to live like this anymore. I was just stressed. I had a really good job, and loved what I did, but I was also at the ceiling of salary. Very quickly, I reached it, and it was like, I'm just I need something different or something better, but I also couldn't take a chance leaving that job because I needed that salary to pay all the bills that I had accumulated over the years. So I became almost trapped in this job, and then I started to resent the job. And it was just this never ending hamster wheel I just never could get off of. It was just constant stress. Money was a tough topic in my first marriage. It was one of the reasons for divorce. It wasn't the only reason, but it was one of the reasons. And in my early 30s, sadly, we bought a home that we couldn't afford. And right at, I was like, '08 is when we bought it. So it was right when the housing bust happened. And we got divorced, and neither one of us could afford that payment on our own. And we couldn't sell it for what we bought it for, because now real estate had went down so much. We had to end up going into foreclosure. And this is the first time in my adult life I'd ever missed any payments. I had made all my payments up until then, even though I was broke, had no savings. I always figured out a way to make it work. And I just had like this deep shame. Like, I need to fix this. I'm never going to put myself in this situation again. At the time, I also had a 2-year-old son named Noah, and I just wanted to be better for him. I just wanted to be a better example to him, because I knew that I was going to be the one he was going to look at to, hey, how do you do this? And here I am, and now in my early 30s, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. I know nothing about this stuff. So that was really kind of the calling of, okay, I need to change my ways. And I just started kind of doing more self-education. Actually, I shouldn't say a little. I did a lot. Um, Podcasts, seminars, books. I mean, I really dove into the topic to try to figure it out because I just didn't want to have that stress anymore. I wanted to have the freedom to make different choices, whether it be career or maybe opening on my own business, whatever it might be. And I just started practicing the stuff in the book and in these classes and just doing the work. And it took about 4 or 5 years to get out of debt. And I paid off about $45,000 and with a divorce in the middle of all of that. So I took almost kind of a year off of that journey because divorce is expensive and having to restart your life and all of that. But along the way, I kind of just was sharing with friends and family and coworkers like what I was doing and how life changing it was. Like I was doing some of this stuff and I was like, I'm not really stressing anymore. I actually have no more credit cards. I have money in the bank. Like things are getting better. And people just started asking me for help. That's kind of how this all started. And they're like, what are you doing? Because I'm struggling with kind of the same stuff. I have credit card debt. I have student loans. We're not on the same page in our relationship with money. Like, what are you doing? How can you help us? And so I just did it for free at first and just started telling people like, hey, let me see your expenses. Let me see your stuff. Let me help you get it set up. And people started to get these great results like I was getting. And it started to have a really great effect on their lives. Not necessarily the money stuff, but it's just the ripple effect it has on your life once you have control over your finances. And that's ultimately what I really fell in love with, was helping people really just kind of level up in their life, and rid themselves a lot of this undue stress once you take control of your finances. And I got out of debt, and crazy enough, I was just like, hey, I'm going to take a chance at this, and decided in 2015 to go very part-time with this, open up a real business, part-time, little part, like really part-time, went to part-time, went to full-time. And within 6 months, I replaced my full-time income. And I've been doing this now 8 years full-time, which is crazy. I
Truly,
can't even
truly.
believe that. Because I always just had dreams of just helping people around my town. I never, now there's this crazy thing called the internet, and I know it's been out for years and years and years, but sometimes we get in this little box of thinking, and it's like the internet has opened us up to, I just had someone join our program from Australia. I never
so
would have,
cool.
never would have imagined that,
It's worldwide.
worldwide. Right. And it's so it's cool, especially with our podcast. I'm sure you ladies probably experience this too, where you get messages from your fans and, they're all over the place. It's just a really cool thing how you can reach so many people with this message. And I think, what separates us from a lot of other people out there is that I am just a normal guy. I'm doing this in my podcast studio in my basement. I live in a normal house. I drive normal cars. I've got normal life problems that everybody else does. We're just going about our finances different. And we're just sharing how much of a dramatic effect that has on the rest of our life and the way we move forward and the things that we're doing. And it's a lot of fun to get light bulbs to go off for normal people, because they look at us and they're like, people come to my house, they're like, I guess I didn't realize you were really that real. Well, I am, And so, we're not like this $500 million company and these personal finance experts with New York Times bestseller books. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that can look almost unrealistic. Like you're speaking to us in this ivory tower up here, and, what do you mean? You got millions of dollars worth of real estate. Now you're going to tell this person over here who's making just a typical American salary how to manage their money. It's just hard to relate to that. Whereas opposed to us on the show, we're all normal. And, I think, it's helping a lot of people realize, like, if I make some changes, I can do this too. And a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point you bring up, because, we see not to like name names, but the big one that comes to mind is like Dave Ramsey and people like that, who at this point are so far removed from the norm, and like
so much so.
The real everyday struggles, like paying for childcare and, stuff like that, where someone like you can level with the people and you can relate and understand. So I'm excited to hear some of your perspectives. So obviously you have a multi-step process and system, but what are some of the things that you can help us start with today? Some small steps we can start to take.
I think some of the smallest things that you can do, especially as you get started, is really becoming more aware of what's just happening with your money. And there was a recent statistic that we shared in our podcast, came out about like 6 months ago, that said upwards of, I think it was like 52% of the millennial generation, which I'm in, does not have any idea what's inside their bank account or what's going on in their bank account. That's over half a generation, right? And now we've got nearly 6, almost 7 out of 10 people living paycheck to paycheck. So I think one of the first things that you can do, and this is a hard step. It's not easy at first because it can be very overwhelming. In fact, I just walked one of my close friends through this whole process, is going back and looking at what you're spending your money on. Where's all your money going? So go back and print out the last 3 to 6 months of your bank statements, your credit card statements. If you're using apps to pay for things like Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, all those, start looking at all those and start going back over the last, if you want to be even overachiever and go the extra miles, do 12 months, do an entire year. And I tell people to do this because there's so many people who come to me and say, I don't have any money to save. I don't have any money to pay off debt. It's just not there. And then when I ask them, okay, well, where's all your money going? And then they start putting a rough budget together. And I know for a fact, it's like, well, you're missing a ton on here. And I know you don't know where your money's going.
Mm-hmm.
At least all of it. You might know some of the big pieces, but you may not know all of it. And time again, I will have people do this and they will come back to me and they will say, I now know that I can save more money and I can pay off more debt. It's just going to things that honestly aren't really providing any value in my life.
Yeah.
It's careless spending, and we all do it. I'm guilty of it still today. Like, we all do it. It's a human thing. Like, you're hungry, kids are crazy, like it's been a busy day. You didn't plan to go out to eat and you end up in the drive-thru or you end up at a restaurant, right?
Or all the
I'm gu-
subscriptions.
Yeah.
Like,
And you almost get into this routine of doing it, and it just becomes something that you don't even really think about anymore. Like, even if you look at something as like as common as like stopping at the gas station. I have so many people that struggle with this, like buying their soda at a gas station or buying their lunch at a gas station, or all of these little stops here and there. Well, you're paying 2, 3, 4, 500% more than, say, doing some of that stuff at home. So again, it's not about you mentioned like Dave Ramsey. We're not a big fan of like cutting everything out of your life and you can't leave your house and you can't do anything. And I'm not a fan of that because that's not realistic.
right. Gotta live.
But what I am a fan of is being more mindful of your spending. Figure out when you go back through those last 3 to 6, 12 months of expenses, what are the things that you're going to keep? What are the things that you're going to shop around? And what are the things that you're going to get rid of? And then focus on the things that you love. Like, if you like going to Starbucks, that's great. Go to Starbucks, go get your coffee. If you like going out to eat a little bit more often, go do those things. But you also have to be willing to sacrifice in other areas that aren't as important to you in order to be able to do some of those things. And what I find time and time again, not everybody, but for a lot of people who are making middle income or even middle to higher incomes, is that there is money that you don't have to cut everything out of your life, and you can still breathe. You can still save money. You can still get out of debt, but you just have to be really intentional with the way you're going about it. And all too often and I'm guilty of this too. You get careless, you get in that routine, and you just spend mindlessly, and you're not really looking back and tracking like where that money's going. And because you're not aware of it, it's easy just to keep doing it. There was a meme that went around, I still see it from time to time. And it's like, how do you waste $10,000 a year? Well, it only costs about $27 and some change per day to waste 10 grand a year. And so, you got to look at it in that perspective. It's not always the big things that are causing all the water to leak out of your bucket. It's sometimes all the little things that you got to be careful of too. And you got to just be more aware of where that money's going.
Yeah.
So first thing, I mean, that's a big part of just knowing where you're at. And if you could do that and then just track that on a daily basis moving forward, analyzing your spending, just paying attention more. You talk about things like behavior, habits, and choices, and improving those. Just being aware and seeing what's going on with your money gets you to wake up a little bit more. It makes you question the next time you're out, do I need that thing? Because I know what I saw on my bank account, and I know I don't really need the thing. I actually want my savings more, so I'm going to pass up on that now because you're just paying attention more. It's amazing how much it makes you sit up straight,
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of my mom, who, like, I'm pretty sure to this day still balances her checkbook with a little pencil and everything. And I don't know, it must have been the last couple of years when I saw her doing this, and I teased her a little bit, and she's like, "Oh, what do you mean you don't balance your checkbook?" I'm like, Mom, I don't think I've ever even owned, like, I don't even know where my checkbook is. But I certainly am not doing that. But I think
I'm with you.
that,
I don't balance a checkbook either. I go through my bank statements. I look at it routinely. But I'm not going through and balancing a
yeah,
bank checkbook either.
you're paying
No.
attention.
Yeah.
I think that that can be a really hard thing to do. Like, I definitely will admit that this has been me for many years and it's getting better now, but like that like subconscious beliefs that you have about money, like money is bad. If you always heard parents, arguing about money,
Yeah.
or we have these different beliefs, or a fear of money, so then you just avoid. I would love to talk a little bit about like the psychology behind the finances. What are some of the basics that you think that everyone should like know? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a broad question, but
Yeah.
Wait,
I mean,
Amanda, I want to add to that too, though, because when you were talking earlier, just this last point about spending, I was writing down like a lot of the times I spend for convenience. I'm thinking of
Mm,
I'm not necessarily worried about like my coffee every once a week, that like brings joy, like you had said, and there's so much psychology behind spending money on something that brings you joy. I think we
mm.
all should still do that. But I'm talking more about like my Amazon frickin' app that I am like at
Oh,
2
gotta
in the
delete it.
morning, like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a baby next month. And so I'm like, I should buy more bottles. And the app is right there. And I look at
yeah.
Amazon at the end of the month when I'm looking at my accounts. My husband's looking at our taxes and he's like, Kaylin, what the hell? You're on Amazon 20 times a day, ordering, returning. And it's so true. And then the psychology behind it is that like I'm never fully content with it. I need to buy more. And I'm going to
Yeah.
return something and buy a different version of it. And it's just this lifestyle, right, that you had even
Quick
talked about
dopamine hit.
previously of this consumerism. And it's like
Yeah.
you're just spending and it's like not making you happy. And you're thinking that you're making it more convenient for yourself, but you're not. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, the apps are just so they have made it so easy to spend money now. And not only just spend it, but spend money you don't have by going into debt. I mean, it is so easy to do
Yeah.
it. It's so hard to get out of it. And this is only going to get worse. I actually was doing a podcast recording with an individual who lives in India. And in India, you can have stuff delivered within 30 minutes of buying it.
Oh my gosh.
30 minutes.
We don't need that.
I can guarantee you that one day be here in the US. I can almost guarantee it. And he says that they are experiencing this just huge issue now with all these people racking up debt because of how quickly you can buy a lot of that stuff. So I think when it comes to like apps like that, those are the things that you like really have to be mindful and careful of and understand. Like, yes, they make it look convenient and cool and awesome. Pay with your phone, even using cardless pay options. Now you don't have to swipe your credit card anymore. Those things are all great, but they are all proven that you will spend more money.
Mhm.
So you just have to be, and again, I think you just have to take a proactive approach and create more of an awareness around your finances and almost, you got to get your nose in there. You got to know what's happening with your money, right? And then as far as the psychology, you mentioned, you're having a baby and, keeping up with, what that's supposed to look like and this whole psychology side of things. I think one of the best things that you can do is get yourself around other people who are having different conversations about money and things and stuff. And obviously social media has helped a lot with that in both ways, but,
Yeah.
of opening up this idea of, less is more. Like right now, if I don't know if you guys are on TikTok, but there's this huge movement of loud budgeting, right? Loud
Mm.
budgeting is this in term right now. And essentially all it means is that you are standing up for your financial life. And instead of saying, I can't afford it, you're saying, I'm choosing not to spend on that because that is not something that brings me as much value as, say, this thing over here that I want to spend
Mm.
on.
Mm.
And so I think for me, how I improved my mindset, the psychology around finances was really just challenging my current psychology of it and what I learned growing up and what my friends and family were currently doing as I was an adult, what my coworkers were doing. And then I went out and I started just, again, self-educating, reading great books about money and just mindfulness around it. I think all of those things, getting yourself in some of these, even with Facebook, getting in some of these Facebook groups with, the FIRE movement, financially independent, retire early. These people are, I mean, they're having conversations all day long in these Facebook groups about money philosophies that go completely against paycheck to paycheck living lifestyle and consumerism and all that. Like, so just even opening up. And I think too many of us, we get in our lanes, right? And we don't want to go outside of that. We don't want to challenge it. And anything that we look out around here, it's going to challenge our kind of core thinking and our core values. You need to do that, especially when it comes to your money, because if your money sucks, like you need to start learning from other people who are going to give you some different viewpoints and give you a better mindset and just some different things to think about. And I think that's one of the coolest things about just having a conversation like this on your show is that there's gonna be people out there and this might be the first time they've ever heard some of this stuff before because it's not really openly talked about all the time, every single day, unless you're actively going out and looking for it.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said too about like rephrasing it with the loud budgeting, because I think even psychologically that's huge, instead of like being self-deprecating like we so often are, or being very like down in the dumps. Oh, I can't afford it. I'm never gonna be able to afford it. I'm too broke for that. To say like, no, that's not actually important for me. That's not a priority for me right now. So I'm choosing to spend my money in other ways.
Absolutely.
Like
Right.
that's even a huge shift.
Yeah. And that one about I can't afford it. Instead ask yourself, how can you afford it?
Mm,
You know, nothing wrong with that. You know,
yeah.
how can you afford to get the things that you want in your life?
Yeah.
You know, all too often we fall for the, you know, the victim and the blame and complaining, and that really gets you nowhere. So have a more, you know, proactive or growth mindset and say, how can I afford those things? Can we cut things out? Can we shop things around? Can I make more money? And to be able to live and have the things that I want to have in my life. Because having things and spending money, there's nothing wrong with it, but not at the expense of your stress and your mental health and destroying your entire financial future, all for in the name of stuff and things, you know.
Yeah.
And I just went through this, you know, sadly, I lost my wife about a year ago, and I had to go through and get rid of everything, which is a very gross thing to do. But it was a, from a financial standpoint, it was like this huge mindset shift for me about things.
Mm.
Like once that person is gone, none of that stuff matters. But it's amazing how much time and effort we spend throughout our days chasing after all this stuff. Look at the Stanley Cup junk going on.
Oh
right?
my gosh, I know.
I
It's
mean,
so
sorry, I shouldn't call it
insane.
junk. You guys might like.
I do have my emotional support water bottle.
Right, right,
It's a
This
dupe.
stuff is crazy. This stuff is crazy. I mean,
right,
that's the
right.
thing. It was meant to have one cup. It is not a Stanley, but it does have a handle.
Yeah.
Like you have one, so you're reusing it, and then you see
Yeah.
these people that have walls of them.
Right.
You're defeating the purpose, honey.
Yep. Absolutely. Right. And so, I mean, not,
Anyways.
not that there's anything wrong with that. And I
No,
don't
if
want to,
that's
you
what
know,
sparks your joy.
yeah, I don't want to yuck on someone's yum. Right. but,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like, you know, these are the things that I have started to just be very aware of and just asking yourself, you know, and too many times, like people are living paycheck to paycheck, especially even when I was like, I didn't have really good short-term or long-term goals. I didn't really have any sort of, you know, vision for my life. And I get when you're in your 20s, you know, you don't really have too much of that. I wouldn't expect a lot of people in their 20s to have too much of that. But when I started getting my early 30s, it's like, okay, what direction is my life going?
Mm.
You know, and once I started to kind of put that together about what I wanted, it almost created this buying filter for my life of, okay, yes, I see that thing. It's cool. It's great. It's shiny. It would be awesome to have. But is that thing going to move me closer to where I want to be? And if the answer is no, it became very easy just to say, no, I'm not going to buy that.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier to bypass a lot of that. But because of the way marketing is, because of advertising, because of social influence, because of social media, you see all these things like these Stanley Cups and you're like, oh, I'm going to get in there. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to get, well, what do you need it for? Have you ever asked yourself, like, what value is that going to bring into your life?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it's just easy to say yes because we don't really have a good direction. We don't really know what we need to have in our lives in order to be happy for ourselves. Not what we care about, what everybody else thinks of us, but what we want. And it's all too easy just to fall into impulsive and wasteful spending habits because you don't have that direction. And all this money just falls through your fingertips that could really be helping you build the life that you really want to live.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's so easy too, like you said, with social media and all these trends and the TikTok shop, and everyone's promoting things that are gonna literally change your life. And
Even my physical therapist had her own Amazon store the other day. She was like, "Oh, just go over here and I'll link my cups to you, like those little cupping things." And I was like, "Damn, girl, you got me
you're like,
good.
it never ends.
I'm gonna go buy them because you're great with them."
Yep, absolutely.
It's so real. But okay, I want to chat a little bit about the relationship of it all
Yeah.
and how this plays into that. So, let's start with before getting into a marriage. So, what are some of these conversations that people should be having with each other, maybe before entering into a marriage or when a relationship is getting very serious and you're really like building a life together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think have it sooner rather than later is really what I would suggest. And this is a really tough conversation for a lot of people because again, money is such a taboo thing. It is just, and for a lot of us, there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of embarrassment around it. And for a lot of people, it's just a subject that's kind of off limits. You know, a lot of people are willing to share their deepest, darkest secret over their credit card balance or their checking account balance. And again, I just went through this with an individual and they hesitated so much because of the fear of what I was going to think about them. And I'm like, do you know how many people I've helped?
Like this is
you know,
literally my job.
right. I was like, you are falling for like, I'm so unique. I'm the only one who's like this. The sad reality is all of us have a lot of the same types of problems when it comes to our finances. In fact, it's very rare I ever get a unique story about why someone's in debt. We all go into debt for a lot of the same reasons. A lot of us may have made the same mistakes, but we all like to play this role of, I'm so unique and I'm the only one who's like this and I'm the worst. No, you're not. Right. I've spoken to thousands of people just like you. So, I think it's just being open to have those conversations without having that shame and embarrassment. And that's hard to do on your own. So my suggestion always is instead of talking about money right away, first start talking about like, number one, especially if you're in a relationship, like what are your goals and dreams? What are the things that you want to do in your future? Like, what does life look like for you? And start talking about how money makes you feel. Like, how do your current, like, especially if you're married, this is a great tip if you're already married, because a lot of married couples or people that are just, are in a household, maybe they're not married, but they share finances. A lot of times the conversation is always around a crisis moment. And that usually is what's causing a lot of the fights. And that's the only time they'll ever talk about it. Crisis goes away. We don't talk about money until the next crisis happens. And then we're going to fight again. Right. So instead, have a conversation that's proactive, that's not around a crisis. And instead of talking about money, talk about how your money is making you feel. Talk about how your current finances make you feel. Like, my finances are stressing me out. I don't want to feel like this anymore. I worry about my finances at work. We're worrying about them at home. I'm the only one who's maybe responsible for them. Like, really talk about how they're making you feel rather than the math side of things. And then start having discussions about, well, what would it look like if we didn't have to feel this way? What would it take for us to get there? Well, maybe that's, hey, I want to get out of credit card debt. I just hate credit cards. I'm okay with a car payment, but I just need to get out of credit card debt because that is just bothering me. Or maybe it's a certain amount of money in your savings account. Maybe your trigger is, hey, once my account gets to this level, like, I'm starting to panic or freak out. So we know, like, hey, we always have to keep this amount of money in here so we're not feeling that way. Or maybe it's a certain thing. Maybe you have a non-negotiable. Like, hey, I always go do this once a year or a couple times a year, or I do this once a month, whatever. Have those conversations. And it's okay for the two partners to be able to have what they want and meet in the middle on some of those things. And, a lot of times what tends to happen though is one partner is in control of the finances and the other, I call it the parent-child relationship. The parent is in control of the finances and the child, who doesn't really have any control of the finances or maybe doesn't want responsibility of the finances, is the one saying, hey, do we have money for this? And the parent says no. And then that partner gets mad. Well, why not? Right? Why don't we have money for these things? So that's why I feel like, the two people need to be in constant communication with each other about it. Even if one person is just responsible for implementing the plan every month, the other person does still have to share the responsibility of what the plan is. And we have an agreed upon plan, and this is how we're going to go about it. And this is what we're going to do. I mean, usually in a relationship, there is one person that's better with handling their finances than the other. And that's okay. But both of you need to still have like a say in what that financial plan looks like. So I think, initially it just needs to be all about like future. What does future look like? What does it look like now? And then what are we willing to do to go about building the future that we want to live? And I mean, I've done classes. I mean, I did a speaking tour back in 2019 where it was all for couples, went to 20 different cities, also included Canada. And I would ask each class, like, hey, how many of you before you got married or even before you got in your relationship ever took any sort of formal financial class or education to help improve the communication on money in your relationship? No one ever raised their hand. Ever. Not one time. And and it's just something that we tend to skip, and it'll figure itself on its own, and it just doesn't. Like, if there's already financial red flags before you get married, I can guarantee you those red flags are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger when you get married. So it's important and critical to start having these conversations and getting yourselves on the same page. And I'm not saying it's always going to be perfect. It's not, even when you're debt free. It's there's still money is still can be complicated. There still can be some challenges in the relationship on what we're going to do and how we're going to go about it. But the more proactive you can be on a monthly basis with it, it can do wonders not only for your relationship, but for your family and really for the rest of your life, because you're just not going to have to constantly deal with all this stress and then the stress on top of the relationship that goes
Mhm.
with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you have any tips on like how to approach these conversations? Like, especially maybe for people that like their norm is like avoiding it and not talking about it. So maybe they're worried about bringing it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, if it's a situation where, and again, it typically is where money is stressful. I always recommend to my members who come to me this, and it's usually there's a reluctant spouse who doesn't really want to work on the finances, and the other one really, really wants to. And it really kind of comes to, again, focusing on the feelings of it and just going to them and saying, look, I'm not here to point the finger. I don't want to point the finger. I just want to share, like, this is how I'm feeling right now about my financial life, our financial life. I'm scared. I'm worried. Things are not going well. Seems like every time something happens, like we don't have a good plan for this. It stresses me out. It stresses you out. And again, if you go to that person when there isn't a crisis going on, I have found that they have much more success and at least getting the conversation going. The other thing I would suggest too, we've had so many people come to us and say this, is that get someone like me in your life. And I know and it doesn't have to be a paid, get on a podcast, listen to like the Debt Free Dad podcast, listen to other financial podcasts, and start listening to some of that stuff together. Even if the other partner isn't really interested in listening to it, play with them when they're around in the same room or doing something, because then they start to chime in on maybe some of the things that are being talked about, like, hey, I don't agree with what Brad just said there, or I do agree with what they said. And then that gets you to two having conversations, but it wasn't around you pointing the finger at them or them pointing the finger at you. It was me. They're either disagreeing with
Blaming
me
you.
or agreeing with me.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It's that third person that you need to bring in just to open it up a little bit. And that can do wonders in just opening up some of the communication in your relationship. And we have this all the time. We'll have people who come into our program and say, my partner doesn't want to do this with me, Brad. What do I do? I'm like, just play the videos around them. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I know that sounds weird, but just do it. And time again, they come back to me and they're like, months later, they're like, they're actually starting to want to work on this with me. I'm like, works every time.
Yes.
And especially
Subtle
when they
hints.
start getting results, they're like, hey, look what we did. Hey, we paid this off. Hey, I got money in the savings, and you actually can have more money to go do this now. And they're like, huh, stuff really works, And then they're like,
Yeah.
well, maybe I'm willing to kind of sit at the table and do a little bit more of this. Um, but it takes time, takes a lot of patience, especially for the individual who is really bearing the weight of all the stress. And that's the part that really I struggle with, because I see too many times where these partners are together and the one just does not care, and the other one is just bearing all of the weight. So again, I would just have these conversations early before you get married, have them as often as you can. And if you're not having them and they're not willing to have them, that's not going to go away. It's not going to get better if you get married. I promise you. So those can be some red flags of, hey, maybe this isn't actually what I thought it was or what it's going to be.
Yeah. I think that's super fair. I mean, if someone's unwilling to have those tough conversations, what else are they going to be unwilling to
Right.
do and work on? And like, what kind of partnership are you hoping to go into? I think that's something good to reflect on as well, that a lot of people just don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have some podcast episodes I can share coming up that we've done on this specific topic, and really good detailed conversations of just kind of some step-by-step things that you can do to kind of go through some of those first conversations.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like we all need a little bit of help with that. Maybe just me. Okay, so you are a dad of two,
Yep.
right? And I don't know exactly how old your children are. I think you said you had a 5-year-old.
Yeah. So my son is 14. He's from my first marriage. And then my daughter is 5. And she is from my second marriage. And my spouse passed away. So yeah, I've those two. And so
Well,
I'm doing all this financial stuff as a single dad now, single income. And that's even more interesting to talk about because people are like, well, you just must have this perfect life. It's like, oh, come to my house, please. Please
yeah.
come over. Please. You can live it for a while. I guarantee you go running the other way.
I love it. Well, yeah, actually, a couple questions that come up there. One, obviously, so sorry to hear about the passing of your wife.
Thank you. I
That's
appreciate that.
just not something that, you ever think is going to happen in your life. And I think that's why it's kind of an important thing to talk about
Oh,
because,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things that you just kind of think, oh, it will never happen to me. But you mentioned a little bit about it on your website, and I'd love to hear a little bit more if you don't mind talking about it. Just how your financial planning and being so forward thinking and future thinking with this stuff, how it helped you
Yeah.
to really be there as a dad for your kids, allow them to grieve, and things that you think listeners should keep in mind too, anything that
Yeah.
they should have in place.
Yeah. I think this is another area that really gets overlooked because these are these are the harder
Mm,
conversations of, okay,
for
what
sure.
happens if something happens to one of us? And sadly, my wife dealt with a lot of mental health issues over the years, and her mental health was unfortunately made even significantly worse because of medications that she was put on. And ultimately, she committed suicide. And completely unexpected. If you ever had met her, you never would have expected that that would have been what had happened. It was just a very tragic situation.
Yeah.
But so as a lot of people who die at a young age, and whether it's suicide or car accidents or cancer or sickness, whatever it is, you gotta understand that it can happen and it can happen at any time. And I have now had to live with this and go through it all. Now, thankfully, we did get life insurance and we planned on this. I mean, I think policies were probably 8, 9 years old at the time when she passed away, and so we knew it's like, hey, we got to get this taken care of. We've got kids to take care of because that's the thing you need to think about. Life insurance isn't for you. It's for the people that you leave behind. It's giving them a hug, like, hey, life's gonna be hell for you, and I don't want you to have to worry about your money. I don't want you to have to worry about any of that stuff. And so get yourself life insurance because if anyone depends on you for an income, if you have a spouse, they depend on you for income. If you have children, they depend on you for income. And when you're not there, that income goes away completely. Um, and my wife made more money than me. And so, we really had to make sure that we were in a good place. And I can tell you that's been the one of the best blessings of all this. Now we were debt free, thankfully. So, I would have made it work one way or the other, but we still have a mortgage on our house. We would have likely have had to move if we didn't have
Mm.
life insurance. We would have had to make some adjustments and some changes. It would have been way more stressful without it. But talk about, hey, what's going to happen if something happens to us? Not only just life insurance, but what would happen with your kids? What would happen like if you live in a split household? You really got to make sure you're talking about those things too. And what happens if something happens to both of you? Where are your kids going to go? Because if you don't have a plan for that, guess who gets to decide? The government. And they're the last people I want to have decide what happens to my kids.
Mhm.
So, be proactive and have some of those conversations. And I had to redo all of this about 6 weeks after uh, Sarah passed away and put everything into a trust and had to re-answer all of these questions again because now I'm the only one. So what happens to my kids, especially Avery? She has some special needs, and I have to be really careful and mindful of where she goes, who takes care of her, and all of those types of things. And all too often, these things get ignored. I mean, you don't have a will in place. A lot of people don't have any sort of life insurance in place. A lot of people don't have any like durable power of healthcare or any sort of power of attorney or any of that make this is all part of your financial life because I mean, and especially I feel fortunate that we did all the work to get out of debt because if I wasn't out of debt and I was living the life that I was living 15 years ago, I mean, our worlds would have been destroyed. I
Mhm.
mean, 100% destroyed. I mean, my kids would have been worse. I would have been worse. I mean, everything would have just been that much worse. So think about that, right? And you talk about, what are some things that we can start having good conversations about? This is one of them, because the reality is that this kind of stuff happens every day to young people. And if you don't have a plan and your finances are already stressful with two of your incomes, just imagine what it's going to be with just one.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do with your kids? How are you going to take care of them? Like even take care of my kids, even cleaning the house, like even when you're a one person household, like it, and yeah, man, all the single parents out there, I got to tell you, I've been learning how to do this now. Sadly, a year as my wife was really getting worse, and now a year after she's passed away. I mean, I've been doing this last 2 years as a single parent mostly, and it is hard to do. And imagine having to do that with now very little money. It's
Mm-hmm.
so hard. So, do yourself, do your spouse a favor, do your kids a favor, and talk about these things and have this stuff done. I promise you that it will be one of the best blessings that you ever give your family if something were to happen to you where they needed to have those things. So I can't, yeah, I speak on that soapbox a lot because I've lived it, you know, and then you talk about grieving and my kids, and I didn't have to work a lot this year, and I was able to take some time off and actually hired some people, which is really cool. And I didn't have to go work 40, 60 hours a week to make up the income that I lost and do all that stuff. I was able to go through this in a much better way because we had our financial life in order. So
Mm-hmm.
when I didn't feel like working because the day was hard, I just didn't do it. And when my kids were having tough days, I was able to spend time with them. We were able to do some stuff and just take time and try to do some things that would actually bring some smiles to the face and do some different things. And it's honestly, I am in a completely different place than obviously I was almost 12 months ago. And I'm in almost a rebuilding phase now. It's like I'm ready to move on to the next phase of my life. And I'm obviously, yeah, there's still some tough days, especially for my kids. And but those days are so much better today because I've been able to take some time and really spend some time with this and really move the process in a healthy way, and allow my kids to do the same thing.
Yeah, and that's showing them such a good example too, you know, and such like like you were saying, a gift to have that freedom to be able to grieve. You know, so many people, like you said, aren't in that position and have to go right back to work or uproot their whole lives. And, you know, so that's so huge. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, you know, the other thing I will say too on the mental health side is that it is a very real illness. You know, what I witnessed happen to Sarah is no different than a cancer, you know, or no different than a real disease taking over. And it is a real disease, but you know, I tend to think that there's still, and it's getting better, but I still feel like there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the mental health industry and just this whole attitude towards it that it's not a real thing and you can just be happy. Just be happy. Don't, you know, that's just not the reality. And I think, you know, having witnessed it and seen the decline and seeing the illness take her over, it was very real and very tragic, just like any other illness is. And so be mindful of that. Take care of your mental health. You know, right now, upwards of 73% of the United States says that money and personal finance is the number one source of stress and anxiety. And upwards of 52% of them say that it's the number one cause of a lot of their mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting your finances in order is one of the best things that you can ever do for yourself and your mental health because it's going to reduce so much other stress and it's going to allow you to focus on other areas of your life that you get joy out of or that you need to work on and work through and you know and not having to spend so much emotional energy on your finances allow you to do some of that stuff. And in regards to medication, same thing. You know, make sure you're advocating for yourself. Talk to your doctors, talk to, you know, close friends and family, especially when you start taking some of these psychiatric medications and things because they do have some wild side effects. I mean, you see these commercials and sometimes people joke and it's like the whole thing's just side effects. The reality is we need to be aware of those things. And sadly, you know, as someone who's taking them, they're not always fully aware of some of the side effects that are happening. So it's important, you know, make sure you're talking to your providers. If you don't like what you're being told, go get out, you know, go get second opinions, but don't just sit back and do the I'm fine and I'm okay. I'll work through it. No, go get help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. And in
Yeah.
fact, if more of us did it, you know, I think a lot more of us would have a lot more happiness and wouldn't have to maybe necessarily rely so much on the medication all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, of course, having finances not be a part of your stress and bringing negativity to your mental health is huge, but also the doors that it opens up to feel comfortable going to the doctor, you know, not being afraid of, well, what's the bill going to
Yeah.
be? And, you know, finding good care too. That's such a freedom to have and such a
Yeah.
reason to get finances in order too.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic right there, right? That kind of fits in with all of this is,
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole healthcare topic and things
Which
like
is a
that. But
whole
oh,
can of freaking
oh
worms.
It's
my
kind of
gosh.
wild though that it comes up in so many of our episodes and
It
it's
really
so
does.
something that everyone deals with. So it's just
Yeah.
important to have a conversation about. So we appreciate you
Yeah.
also speaking about that and
Yeah.
how it impacts your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had to go through that. Our first insurance company, when Sarah started having a lot of her mental health issues, they didn't cover a lot of mental health services. So the following year when we had to reapply, that was one of the first things I was looking for. I was like, okay, what's the best coverage I can get for mental health services? And there are some pretty decent ones out there. And I actually have the same plan because when I need therapy, I'm going to get it and it's not super expensive. It's affordable. And I just made it a priority. And I think more of that needs to be put in there. And I think that's part of why I want to bring light to the conversation, because it is such a real illness that we need to be taking care of. That is such a,
Yeah.
it is something that has just been so overlooked for so many years. But I think the conversations have been so much better. Social media, I think, has helped. A lot
Yeah.
of people opening up those conversations, and obviously, doing shows and things like this, I think are great.
Definitely. It's an important conversation to have, even though it can be a tough one. But I think especially after COVID and everything, that really exacerbated a lot of mental health issues for sure. But brought that to the forefront of the conversation. So
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
pros and cons. But speaking of children, I would love to hear, because I know we have a lot of parents that listen, what things you're going to teach your kids about finances and what conversations you have with them. I know one is 5 years old, so I'm sure you're not going too deep into the budgeting with her yet. But I think that's an interesting.
Yeah.
I think you
Well,
carry
I
through
will.
your life. I remember like my dad talking about the value of the dollar at
Oh
so young
yeah.
and how like it gets imprinted on you. And so it's so important what you're saying in front of your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, that's and speaking of five, one thing I do, if you pay attention to the toys, a lot of the toys, the credit cards, the cash registers, and what do they
Mm.
come with? They come with a little plastic credit card. I take those away from my daughter. She doesn't get those.
Oh my God,
I love
that's
that so
so
Yeah.
true.
But look at how early. Oh, I'm swiping.
Yeah.
I'm swiping, right? I mean,
And some of them
such
make
an
the little sound too.
right. Yeah.
much.
You've been approved, right? I mean, it does. And so I think even doing some of those little things, I know it sounds silly and people are probably like, this guy's crazy. Well, hey, guess what? A lot of that stuff. Look at the candy cigarettes. Well, at least when I was a kid,
Yes.
the candy
Mhm.
cigarettes that had the fake smoke come out of them.
So true.
Shocking. You can't find those anymore. Why not? Because it promotes you to start smoking.
Yes.
Right? But yet, hey, we're going to give these little kids fake credit cards because that sounds like a great plan. Even though today they just came out with a statistic that we've hit another record of credit card debt. It's like $1.1 trillion in credit card debt.
Wow.
Like, but we don't do those types of things. It's
Right.
interesting. But yeah,
Capitalism,
I think
baby.
I think it really does kind of come down to the line of you can help your kids so much. You don't even have to directly teach them. Just show them how to do it by how you handle it.
Mm.
I think you can show them so much, and there are so many different learning opportunities or teachable moments throughout our lives where we can have those conversations. Like, for instance, when you're at a checkout and they say, hey, you can save X amount of percent if you sign up for the credit card, and you're there, you saying no. And when my son asks, well, why wouldn't you do that if you're going to save money? And then I now get to tell him about, okay, well, here's how this really works. And here's the majority, a lot of people don't pay it off right away. So now you have to pay interest. And statistically, it's been proven that people spend more using a credit card than they do, say, using cash.
Mhm.
And so, you have to be mindful of those things. Yeah, and now they ask you like 3 or 4 times at the checkout, right? A lot of these places make more money off their credit card fees and interest than they do off the stuff that they sell.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of things can just be shared just in those daily teachable moments and having some of those conversations. Right now, my son is, like I said, he's 14. And so he's starting to look into getting a job. And, in this next, year, he can start working. And, that's when I'll really start kind of sitting him down and showing him how to just do a simple basic budget of, okay, you're making this amount of money. Here are some of your small expenses. Here, you want to put some money away for spending, or you want to put some money, like we're going to start working on just, a regular budget. The other day I was talking to him about how much the mortgage is for the house. I was just explaining, hey, since, Sarah passed away, like, I now have to cover the mortgage all by myself. And because I've managed my finances, I'm able to do that. Here's how much it costs to live here. And you should have saw his eyes open up. He's like, oh, what?
Mhm.
Like, really? I'm
And do
excited
you
if I get
share
like a
real numbers with him?
yeah, yeah. I share the exact
I love
number
that.
of what I do.
Because I think
And
that that's a lot of the conversation, whether it's with a child or your friends or your family, of no one actually talks about like, hey, I make this much money and this is how much my bill is or something. And I get
right.
that there's some confidence in whatever terminology you want to call it, but it's like it's so awkward sometimes and it's competitive and it's like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's this shame around it too, you know, and I
Hmm.
think we worry like, oh, our kid's gonna tell everyone what we make and things like that. And
Sure.
I try to keep those conversations as real as I possibly can and sharing real numbers and what I spend money on and why I do the things the way that I do them. And it's not like it's every day. It's just when the conversation comes up, I take it as a moment to share. So I mean, obviously, as they're younger, and it comes around just changing the framework of what you say too. If you're constantly saying like, "Hey, Dad, can I get this?" and you respond, you're like, "No, we're broke."
Mm.
No. Okay, well, that sets a negative financial mindset right away, right? That's starting to create that pattern of, oh, we're broke. We can't afford those things. Well, instead say, no, we actually have a budget and plan for our money this month, and that's not really part of the plan, but it can be. So let's talk about how we can put it in the plan. Or maybe better yet, let's talk about how you can put it in your plan and you can buy it.
Hmm.
And that creates more of, oh, well, I could actually buy some of these things. In fact, I was talking to one of my friend's kids the other day about this. Lululemon leggings. This is a
Yeah.
girl. Loves these Lululemon leggings. And these things are like $90 to $100 a
They're
pair.
so expensive.
And so they're like, I want more. And I asked her, I was like, she's 12. And I was like, well, instead of asking your parent for it, why don't you say, how can I afford to get it?
Mm.
And then you don't have to depend on them. You just start making your own money and then you can buy them and when you want to buy them. Oh, I never really thought about that. Yeah. So guess what she made? She made a chore list. She's starting to do chores and she's already started to make some money. So sometimes, it's just like changing the conversation and just flipping the script a little bit and going about it a little bit different way. And it's amazing. Like kids learn the value of work and they learn the value of making money and that, now they get to learn how to control it and get to spend it. They get to make decisions with it. All those things are such just great education learning throughout, especially their adolescent and teenage years and, getting into the early 20s, especially getting into college. So many kids just benefit so much from just those basic skills. And I think that's one of the things, a lot of this will always go, well, it's the education system's responsibility to teach my kids about money. No, it ain't.
They're not gonna.
Well, and if they do, who's to say that the teacher's teaching it isn't broke?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not talking bad about teachers, but all of that stuff has to be reinforced at home. And I think sometimes we put it all on the shoulders. Well, if the school ain't going to teach you, well, they ain't going to learn it. Well, that's a bad plan. We as parents need
Yeah.
to take responsibility and say, not only are they learning about it in school, but I also want to model a lot of the good behaviors at home so they can start to practice some of this stuff. And again, it doesn't have to be hard. It's just having a different conversation, a different outlook, and just being more mindful of your own money, and it'll do wonders for your kids.
Yeah. And it's so beyond even like educating them. It's really cultivating what kind of relationship they're going to have with money and how they
Right.
approach it, which isn't something they're going to teach in school.
Yeah.
You
There's so
know?
many people I have on my podcast. We bring on my Roots members who have had these tremendous journeys. And so many times they say, Brad, this is just all I knew. All I knew was how to be broke. Nobody ever taught me how to do it. Nobody's ever taught me anything that you've shared with me in this program. Nobody's ever shared any of that stuff with me. I see it all the time. And it's something that we can fix as parents and our kids can do better than us. And I want them to do better than me, right? So I want to share this stuff with them. When I look at things like compound interest and mathematical explosion compound interest speed, that's something that's simple. I want my kids to know the power of saving early and saving often because I wish I could go back to being 16 and opening up a kid's Roth IRA and putting just a little bit of money in there because
Mhm.
that money at my age now would be amazing, right? And so I only wish I would have known some of those tools. And I'm gonna do my best to share that with my kids. And at the end of the day, when they become adults, they can use what they want. It's gonna be on their shoulders. But hey, I did my best in giving them all the tools to be successful. And I think the more we can do that, man, the better their lives are gonna be. And hopefully a lot of this paycheck to paycheck stuff can go away, which is more proper money management.
Oh, I love it. So much good stuff. We're coming up on time, and I feel like we could just really dig into so much more. But okay. Two last things. One, so you said you did a lot of self-education. So of course, all of these people are going to be running right over to the Debt-Free Dad. But if you could suggest one or two, either, books to read or any resources like that.
Yeah. So Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is a great kind of psychology mindset book.
Mm,
Great stuff. Not a lot of numbers, so I love that.
love that.
Book not related to finances, but definitely applies not only to finances and literally every area of your life. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. It's called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy.
Okay.
And it's all about making just small incremental adjustments and changes in your life on a daily basis. So it creates this compound effect over time. And very much like compound interest in your money. At first doesn't look like you're making a lot of progress, but 30 years from now, it's like, oh, I got a lot of money, right? So it's kind of the same thing. It's making small little adjustments that will, in the end, make these, huge amounts of progress, and you'll be able to see these huge results in your life. And again, you can apply it to every area of your life. So those would be the two that I would definitely start looking at. As far as Bonnie Ware wrote a podcast episode about the 5 regrets to dying. I'm sorry, not a podcast episode, a blog post, 5 regrets to dying. I love this. She actually wrote a whole book about it eventually. But it really talks about what do people in their older lives regret. And amazingly, none of it has to do with like, well, I didn't get a bigger house and I didn't get that fancy car and I didn't have as much as my neighbor. It's the simple things in life that a lot of people regret. It's the free things that I wish I would have been more happy, or I wish I would have went out and pursued my dreams and the things that I wanted to go after and do, or I wish I would have not given up on some of those relationships that maybe I didn't spend enough time on, or I would have spent more time with my kids. And there's so many other different resources I could share on this topic because I love it, because this is more the holistic side of personal finance.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, what's the secret of life? Well, I think ask the old people because they've lived it. And how would they do things different? And it's amazing that a lot of them aren't regretting not chasing after a Stanley Cup in a store.
Either listen to the babies or listen to the elderly, but all of us in between, we're crap.
It's all convoluted.
We are. Yep. So I think those are definitely some good ones to start out with.
I love that. And then Caitlin, unless you have any other questions or anything, it's just gonna give you a chance to hype yourself up.
Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple more episodes that I can share on the Debt-Free Dad podcast. Again, you can find that at every podcast platform that exists. Episode number 172 is when to talk about money in a relationship. So if you're in a newer relationship or maybe in a relationship that you've been in for some time and that money conversation just hasn't started up, this is a whole episode on how do we do it? Like, how do we get through this yucky thing called money and talking about it and making it more of a proactive experience. And then episode number 11, all the way back 4 or 5 years ago when we started our podcast, we did a whole episode on how to stop fighting about money in your relationship. So again, I think even in that episode, I believe there is a free guide, 10 or 12 questions that we'll give you as a downloadable PDF that the two of you can work on separately. So the idea is go through these 12 questions separately and then come together, maybe make it a date night and say, how did you answer your questions and how did I answer my questions? And it's going to open up a lot of information about how do you feel about money? How do I feel about money? How do we think money should work in the relationship? Where do we see ourselves going? Lots of great things that you can get there. We have over 200 episodes now on the show. We're releasing 2 episodes a week starting this year. So you can go to the Debt-Free Dad, go to debtfreedad.com and get the podcast that way as well. But I would start there. I think if you're new to this money stuff, I think the podcast is just a great way to start getting some different ideas, out there and hearing how just normal everyday people are doing this stuff. And one of the cool parts, we got 5 co-hosts on the show. And so we all have different backgrounds and different walks of life. And one of them being Katie, who's a single girl. She started this process a little over 5 years ago, making $13 an hour. She has now paid off on a single income in the last 5+ years, 140 grand. And she is very close, I think, within the next 18 months or so to reaching debt freedom. And she did it all on her own, because a lot of people say, well, I'm single, I can never do it. Well, here's Katie. Look at her. She's doing it, And so she shares her perspective as a single person and being able to afford life in 2024. And, we got Chris, who's in his older years. He's retired, now opened up his own ice cream shop. And he talks about it. Well, hey, I was broke and I got myself out of debt. Now I'm living my dream. And I'm just a normal guy. He was a teacher. He was a teacher his whole life, And so, so we bring in a lot of these different types of backgrounds of just normal people, not millionaires. These are just normal people, and they're just sharing how they did it.
I love that. I'm gonna go tune in. I don't know about you, but that's what
Love
I'm
it. Thank you so much.
doing. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Love doing this because again, it's such a not enough talked about topic, especially just in social circles, friends, family. And I love being able to come on and share with you guys. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much.